Hi, my name is Devan Shimoyama. I'm an artist based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this is my exhibition, my first time here in Spain. It's titled Tell Me. That is a reference to fortune telling. All of these works are my own interpretations of tarot cards. I look mostly at the Marseille deck and the Rider-Waite-Coleman-Smith deck. And that one is really important to me just because Pamela Coleman-Smith is a Jamaican artist and illustrator who only until recently got some praise and attention for all of her work actually creating a lot of these images and symbols. So these 15 works depict different cards of the major arcana. It's a continuing series, and I'm excited to also include some sculpture as well for other tarot cards that aren't present here, such as the tower, which will be a physical tower sculpture that's made, and also the wheel of fortune should be another sculpture. But these 15 works depict mostly self-portraits. I'm looking at the main character as a kind of version of myself who starts off the journey as the fool in Les Maths, and he goes through and learns about himself through different magical moments and interactions and different things throughout his journey. I've also included more recently in the newer works depictions of my family. Here in the exhibition you'll see the Empress represented as my mother, and then the Pope, or the Hierophant, is a representation of my grandfather, and then the High Priestess is my grandmother. And so for me it's really important to include family in this because it's thinking about this journey of the Fool and his own growth internally. For me, a lot of that is influenced by family, and for me, being able to have them come out here and see these versions of themselves will also be really exciting. And this will be a lot of their first time seeing my work all together like this. I started doing some tarot exploration at the beginning of the pandemic. For me, it was a way to think about alternative ways of understanding myself or making really difficult decisions. So fortune telling and divination practices became really of interest to me because it was a way for me to not necessarily have blind faith in something, but to actually help me make decisions and understand things as I laid out the cards and could create my own interpretations of them based on the symbolism and the history of those symbols. But then also through making the paintings, I was able to really learn a lot more about the history of the illustration side of things, and also the history of a lot of the ways in which someone like Pamela Coleman-Smith was erased from this history of mysticism. And she, as a partially black woman, specifically, I think that it's really important to emphasize that and to celebrate her. And so in all of these paintings, I've included women's mouths as a kind of paying homage to black women, and they're all superimposed on top of my own face. So a lot of the work in terms of materiality is influenced by craft, but then also by a lot of places that feel like safe spaces to me. And so my environment comes into the work through the materials. So I think a lot about fashion, what people are wearing. A lot of the clothing in the paintings are my own actual clothes, so I embed them into the painting. There's a lot of materials like brooches or costume jewelry, and for me that reminds me a lot of drag queens, and I'm friends with a lot of people who do drag. And also it reminds me a lot of just the way that people dress up at church, or the ways in which certain types of women might adorn themselves with a lot of jewelry. And so I grew up in a household full of women mostly, and so for me it's a way to celebrate them and to bring them into the world of the painting. My creative process starts usually with a lot of reading. I tend to read a lot of different types of things. I read poetry, I read a lot of fiction and fantasy and science fiction as well. And so for me, a lot of those references sometimes come into the painting in subtle ways, sometimes more explicit, obvious ways. I also watch a lot of animation, and so in this exhibition specifically, you can see some references to that in some of the paintings. Certain characters related to transformation in animation appear in some of the works. I usually start with a digital collage. I'll take a lot of photographs. I make a digital painting, and then I'll use that as a reference to actually start the work, which involves a lot of playing around with materials. And since I'm using materials that already have certain textures or colors, for me, painting becomes a lot of like testing things out and placing things on the surface or holding it up and trying to match the color. And so, yeah, it becomes a process of reacting to materials as well. Yeah, I work mostly with the same or similar materials in most of my work. It always starts with a foundation of drawing. So every single one of these has color pencil. For me, drawing is the foundation of my entire practice, and it's the most important thing. Collage comes naturally to me, and so it starts to become this process of actually being able to be more immediate. So I'm able to, use clothing as clothing when I want to, or think about fashion and constructing clothing using special materials. It's something that I've always really admired, and so I love being able to include certain fashion elements in the work. A lot of the other materials, like the glitter and the jewelry and things like that, are things that I just I'm really dazzled by, and so for me it kind of creates a really exciting experience to view in person because of the way that the light interacts with all of the materials. So for me, painting is so important to be seen and experienced in person, and this type of materiality, when you walk past a painting, the way the light hits it or the way that the material kind of changes or responds to being experienced in person is really important.